What is up, Myriad Mesa graphic design students? How is it going? Hope you all are okay. I miss all of you. Hope you did something nice for your moms this past Mother's Day. Okay, so yeah, I'll try to make this as quick as possible. So this video is going to be about visual hierarchy and emphasis. And we are switching gears now to looking at not components anymore, because we kind of closed the door on that in the DBI Blue Book, Design Basics Index, everybody's favorite. Moving over to talking about composition, and it's very, very important. I think it's more so important to talk about composition than it is to talk about the components, but I kind of like to start to talk about the components because it's good that you understand what all the parts are that are going to go in your designs and then know how to arrange those parts. And so I've included this little area here now on Haiku under the distance learning that talks about visual hierarchy and emphasis. And I think out of the different topics that we're going to cover in the last few weeks of the year, visual hierarchy and emphasis is probably the most important thing that we can cover. So there's 6 parts to composition that are discussed in the DBI Blue Book, and the first that we're going to look at is visual hierarchy. And there's not going to be enough time in the weeks ahead to be able to cover each of these, so I'll kind of group them together, but I'm keeping visual hierarchy and emphasis sort of separate for you guys to look at this week. The assignment is relatively easy to do. I've tried it out both in PowerPoint and in Illustrator, but I highly suggest that if you have access to either Photoshop or Illustrator, that you pick one of the two. I'm going to demonstrate it in Illustrator and PowerPoint, not in Photoshop, but you could set it up the same way in Photoshop and pretty much do the same thing. So if you're more comfortable with Photoshop and you have access to both Photoshop and Illustrator, God bless you. Just do it in whatever one is good for you. Or if you don't have access to those, but you have access to PowerPoint, which you should with your 360 account, then you can do it with PowerPoint. PowerPoint's a fantastic program to actually be able to do some pretty cool design work. And so if that's something you're comfortable with. But anyways, let's talk about visual hierarchy and emphasis first. We're going to talk about what it is basically and why you would want to use it in your designs. So I'm just going to read from you here off of Haiku. It says the components are the parts that you put in your design. You guys should already understand that now. It's things like the images, the typography, the colors, the shapes, the supporting elements, those types of things. And by now you should know how to make these components work in Photoshop or Illustrator and how to build them with those two programs or gather them on the internet. It's the composition, though, that will make or break your design. If you don't have a good understanding of composition, it won't make any difference how good your components look in Illustrator or Photoshop and how good your filters look and all that stuff. It'll just make your design look terrible if you accidentally don't use composition properly, especially visual hierarchy and emphasis. It's almost always apparent in every design that you look at is this idea of giving emphasis to something in your design that will draw your viewers' attention, draw them into your design so that they explore it and then they go and do something with whatever the message is that your client's asking for. So a good example is this little picture here of this before and after of this diver and the whale. And if you look at this closely, maybe you were looking at it already, and you look at the before and after, what's changed? And the only thing that's different here is that whale is bigger. And that just simply looks, simply put, better than it did on the left. And the reason is it creates a visual understanding for our brains that there is something more important in this design on the right than there is on the left. And the problem with the one on the left is it's actually giving equal size treatment to both the diver and the whale. And so this creates sort of a visual competition for your attention. And in the end result, it's going to make the viewer that's looking at this feel uneasy subconsciously. And so that's not a good thing. And so you could do something just as simple as actually making it a little bit bigger than the rest of the stuff on there. And it creates this orderliness to it and ease of looking at it for the viewer. It'll look better. That simple. Now you can achieve this besides scale. You can achieve it with things like color, with things like drop shadows and drawing attention to one part of something. The other thing that it does a really good job of doing when you just create emphasis in this visual hierarchy is it allows you to grab multiple things and group them together. So you can make many things that a client is asking for in a design look like 3 parts rather than 25 different parts that are all coming at the viewer at the same time. And so that's a problem. If there's too much information overload for somebody to look at, they're going to leave your design and they're going to go somewhere else, and that's not a good thing. We want to bring them into the design, interest them in the design, and then buy into whatever it is we're trying to sell them in the design or whatever message we're trying to get across. So that's the idea here. And I thought that Jim Krause sums it up beautifully in this quote I pulled from his book. He says, "Imagine a beautiful work of sculpture stored in a crowded closet or under a heap of rubbish. The quality of the sculpture itself is unaffected by its whereabouts, but without proper placement, its message will be tainted and possibly obscured by its surroundings." So basically what he's saying is it doesn't matter how nice this sculpture looks. If you shove it in a closet and you cover it with a bunch of garbage, it's going to look like crap, no matter how much time you put into it. And the same is going to go for your design. If you spend all this time making this fantastic sort of design or graphic that you're going to drop into an advertisement, and you don't do proper placement and division of space and all the things that are covered under composition, it won't make any difference. It's just going to look like crap to the person that's looking at it. They're going to go somewhere else and your design's going to fail. And so that's what we're trying to look at here so you guys understand this and you don't make those mistakes. So again, the 6 that we're looking at are visual hierarchy and emphasis, placement, division of components, alignment, grouping, harmony, and flow. And things like harmony and flow kind of are closely related to each other. Alignment and grouping and placement division are kind of sort of, and you'll see these 6 different things sort of interwoven with one another. They kind of make sense, and I'll explain it here in a second when we look at the Tonka toy ad. But what I've got for you this week is an assignment where you're building a toy ad where we're going to focus on visual hierarchy and emphasis, and I'm going to show you how to actually do that. So before we get into the instructions, basically the why behind visual emphasis and visual hierarchy, again, is to create more of an easier way for your viewer to understand things in your design. And again, it basically does 2 things. It creates an orderliness to it, and it draws their attention in. But the second thing it does is it makes a lot of information only look like a small amount of information. And I'll explain as I go through that. So that's what it is. That's why you would use it in your design. So let's see it in action. So the instructions this week are, first watch this video, obviously, and then set up or first gather some information about what toy you want to do. There's some specifics on that for things like, of course, make sure you look for high quality images so they're not pixelated or blurry or whatever. You should already know how to do this when you do your Google search for the biggest pictures possible, because you can always shrink those down. And PNG format's great because in most cases the PNG will have a transparent background, but that's not always the case. There's a way to actually work around that. I'll show you, and I'll show you the different nuances of whether or not you can get a picture that has a white background or get a picture that has a transparent background, and how you can fix that and work it into your design. So another thing you're going to need is the manufacturer's logo. You can see I have the Tonka logo here. I have several pictures, 4 to 5 pictures that you want to get off the internet. And then get some text. Specifically, you want to get a catchphrase. So I don't know if you guys can see that very well. It says "so much more than a truck" in the video. I'll blow it up here in a second there so you can see that. And then a little bit of a description about your toy. So I think the best approach in this is, pick a toy that you know or that you liked as a kid or that you still like or whatever, and download some pictures of it in high quality. Get the logo and get some text. And then we're going to create something else. In most advertisements, you'll see this is going to be a call to action. And your call to action is the thing that you want to finish up your design with. It's telling the viewer, look, you're excited about this. Where can I go buy it? Here's how you can go spend your money on my product, or your client's product. And then, of course, when you're all done with this, you're going to export your PowerPoint slide as a JPEG and turn that into me, or you're going to export it in Illustrator or Photoshop as a JPEG and turn that into me. Please don't turn in your Illustrator file, or don't turn in your PowerPoint file or your PowerPoint slide in PowerPoint version. I won't be able to see it. It has to be as a JPEG. So this should take you about 1 to 2 hours to do. The video is going to take probably about 20 minutes to watch. So let's look at it first in PowerPoint. So I don't want to get into the aesthetics too much about layout and the different layout schemes that exist, but I will show you that this does have a layout scheme, and it's based on something called rule of thirds. We'll talk about that when we talk about placement division and the golden mean and things like that next week. But I've just picked a layout for you. Just follow my layout. So here I am in PowerPoint, and you can see this layout, what it looks like before you put anything in there. And so what's nice about PowerPoint, I discovered, if you go to View, I believe it's View, yeah, you could check off Ruler and Guides, and this will allow you to drag out. It starts you off with a horizontal guide and a vertical guide, and you can kind of drag this off to your left. What you want to do is, vertically speaking, you want to divide up your design into 3 major areas, or you want to have about 2/3 of it for this large image. So you want to take this middle vertical line and move it over to the right, leaving about 1/3 of your design to the right and 2/3 to the left of that line. Then you want to take your horizontal guideline and move that down to the lower third of your picture, allowing for about 2/3 above that and about 1/3 below it. And so what we're going to do is create a visual hierarchy and emphasis on one large image. That's going to be our selling point here. And in this case, you can see it's the Tonka truck there. So the large image will go here. We'll put several small images here, including our logo. We'll have a description down in this area and then a call to action. So this is just your basic rule of thirds grid layout. And so when it's all done, it'll look something like this. Now, here's what it looks like in PowerPoint. And there's a reason why I had to do this with a white background. I'll explain that in a second, and how it looks in Illustrator. And this is why I think Illustrator and Photoshop, if you have access to those 2 programs, use those programs, because they're going to give you more access to cool things that you can do, like drop shadows and being able to do custom masking and that type of thing. So I'll talk about what I did here in Illustrator and actually pulling color into it, because it just makes it so much more rich and easier to look at on the eyes and fun to do than it does when you're using a PowerPoint, because PowerPoint's a little bit limited. So what I did is I gathered all my images. I got 4 images in here, and I noticed rather quickly that the PNGs that I downloaded weren't actually transparent backgrounds. So the best that I could do here is lay the images out where I wanted them and shrink them down and size them. And I just want to explain to you what I did. When you're using visual hierarchy and emphasis, you want, and if you count how many different parts in here, but you want one thing in this to be the focus of the attention of the viewer. This is going to be your number one. I always say it's your number one. And then you want to group things in proximity to each other in such a way that it looks like maybe 3 major parts rather than many different parts. So if you count these, when I dragged in, let's just count how many parts are. There's the truck here, that's 1. The logo's 2. This picture's 3, 4, 5, 6. The call to action 7. This text box is 8. And we have a little catchphrase, it's 9. So there's 9 things here. But when you look at it, it actually looks like there's just 3 major areas. There's the truck in area number 1. Area number 2 would be this area and grouping of proximity of this area here, that's 2. And then this bottom part is 3. And you could argue that the call to action is maybe 4 areas. So we've taken this and we thought it through with composition using a few tricks of layout to make it look like 3 areas, and now it looks a lot easier on the viewer's eye when they're trying to figure out what they're supposed to look at. The other thing that composition does with visual hierarchy is when you number things in order of importance mentally, it's going to create a pathway with which your viewer will start to subliminally and subconsciously look at, this picture first, and then they're going to go here and look at this next. And then they might read the text and go, you know what, I really like this product. I want to buy it for whoever. Where do I do that at? And that's where they finish up. So it's almost like this zigzag pattern as they look through it. And if you don't believe me, the literature suggests when you study this stuff in school, it suggests otherwise, and it shows that the proof is there that this happens with our brains subliminally, and you kind of follow through. So you got to trust that that's the way it's going to happen. And be careful about your placement of things. And we'll get more into rule of thirds and placement division, proper grouping, and even aligning. But I just want you to do this. When you get your pictures of your toys, you want to make sure that your best one, the one that you like the most, is going to be number 1, and it's going to be quite a bit bigger than everything else in your design. That's going to be your number one. And you want to draw all the attention to that. So that's why I want you to place it in this upper left third and have it take up as much space as you possibly can without it invading any of these other types of areas. So it's as simple as that. Then you could take some of your other pictures and kind of sprinkle them over here on the right, just to kind of showcase that there's other types of trucks or whatever it is, different types of toys that you're selling. Place the logo along the top, and you want to align it so that it doesn't creep too much into this area. You want to keep this sort of separate, but it's okay to kind of go off into this area a little bit, because this is called bridging. This is another technique that if you want to kind of connect things to each other so it doesn't look like it's too separated, you can kind of have things like this logo kind of drift into this first area a little bit, but not too much. And then I would do things like, I'm going to make this big enough that the back of the A aligns with the back of the two ends of these two trucks. So that's a little bit of a lining technique that comes a little bit later. And so we want to keep those sort of orderly, and I kind of zigzag them. You could have stacked them on each other, but I thought it would be a little bit more exciting to kind of have them offset. And then down here in the lower area, I created a text box for this to kind of float inside of. And this text box, I want to be careful not to put too many of these components that I'm dropping off here too close to the edges. So that's another thing too, is as you drop in your pictures, as you drop in your text and your logo, you want to create this sort of no man's land of you're not going to put anything there. So I knew that I was going to eventually bring in a border because I couldn't get rid of the white backgrounds because there's no way to do clipping masks in PowerPoint. I mean, you can do clipping masks in PowerPoint, but it's very, very limited. I think it just limits it to just boxes and circles. So, but you can't do like I did here in Illustrator and actually draw around the toy. So just keep that in mind. And because of that, because we couldn't get transparent backgrounds on these, I just decided, okay, I'll go with a white background overall, and I'll bring in a little bit more color by creating a yellow border that echoes some of the color of these trucks. And so that's kind of the explanation there. So I created a text box, and I did some copy paste from Tonka's website. So if you're struggling to find information on the internet, I looked up toy advertisements. I stumbled across Tonka's webpage. And as I was going through this, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. For over 70 years, blah, blah, blah. And I just simply highlighted this, copied it, pasted it. They already had a cool catchphrase right here because I knew it was catchphrase because it was bigger and bolder. And you'll want yours to be bigger and bolder too. And they dropped that into another text box. So there's literally some visual hierarchy going along with the typography as well too. You want to sell the product, so of course the logo is going to be bigger than the catchphrase, bigger than the actual flavor text. So you'll notice a visual hierarchy with the size of your text too. And usually there's about 3 sizes that you'll use in your design, and you'll typically use like 12-point font like that you write your papers with, and maybe like 14 or 18-point for larger bodies of text than an advertisement, and then maybe go bigger on something like a title for a catchphrase, and even bigger for a logo, that type of thing. And so there's a visual hierarchy with the text is what I'm getting at. And then I did a little bit of bridging here with this image. I thought this was nice where, if you read the text and you wanted to get to the call of action, that this image is sort of creeping into the text a little bit here and also creeping into these links. And so it creates a nice mental bridge that after you read this, you kind of bridge over to the buttons here, and then you go and you buy your toy or whatever. So last but not least, because there was so much white in the background, I thought a border would help as a supporting element, not draw too much attention to itself, because that's what a supporting element should do, right? But what color should I use? And so I'm looking, when I'm trying to figure out what my color palette's going to be in my design, I'm looking at overall colors that I could pull from the images that I've already placed in here. So the yellow, for example, in the bigger truck would be a color that I might look for here. Some of this orange in this truck, maybe the red in these sort of headlamps here. And if you look really carefully, some of the blue there might actually be nice to add a little bit of color to this. So what I did is I created a large shape in PowerPoint here. And when I did insert, I believe under design, one of these ones here, you can go in. Oh gosh, I can't remember where I did this. It was under shapes, I think. And after you draw your shape, you'll have the option to like change what you want the color of the outline to be. but for the life of me, I can't find out where it's at right now. But you'll find it too. So it'll be, you know, what do you want the color of the text to go inside the box, and what do you want the outline and the fill color to be? What you'll want to do is set the fill color to 0, and then set the outline to be whatever color you want that to be. What's nice about this is where you go to choose that color, there's an eyedropper just like there is in Illustrator. And you could click on that eyedropper and go in and say, I want it to be, you know, sample a color off of that, and then it'll actually make it that color. And so I could, you know, sample that blue, for example, and pull that in as a border and see how that looks, and test that. So that's PowerPoint. You need only do one slide. You don't have to do this part, but you could follow my video just to kind of get this all set up and know what parts to put in there, and then just insert your toys and your text, etc., and call it a day and then export it, just to kind of practice that visual hierarchy. Now on over to Illustrator. Here's what I did a little bit differently with this. The layout was the same, only this time I wanted to do a little bit of clipping masks in this. So getting back to what you should already know about clipping masks, if I inserted color, because these weren't transparent PNGs when I got them off the internet, I wanted this sort of, because it was a child's ad too, it looked kind of cool to just do a sloppy clipping mask, and it's super easy to do. And it gave it kind of like this cool style to it. And so I just quickly went around this in a sloppy way with the pen tool, and I drew a shape all the way around, kind of in this jagged way. And then I took that shape after I had already placed the image, and I placed that cutout shape on top, select them both, and I right-clicked and said make clipping mask, and it cut it out in that shape. And then I just simply did a blocky drop shadow off that to kind of draw even more attention to it. And I made sure that my drop shadow pulled in some of this grayscale color that was the shadow from that truck, and it looked pretty cool. And then I tried it on this truck, and I just got lazy. I didn't actually apply a drop shadow to this one and this one, but I still did the cutout look nonetheless. And then I did things like, okay, I didn't feel like I had enough color along the bottom here, so I just did a rectangular shape. And as the fill color, I pulled out some of that blue in the bottom, or in that truck there. And so those are just a little mental things that help with what's called flow. And getting back to the whole idea of what we were talking about here on the Internet Haiku, flow, visual flow, is going to be one of the actual composition topics that we're going to talk about later on, and how to tie everything in together, make everything look good as it goes together, and this whole idea of harmony. So that's something you want to keep in mind too when you're doing this. But again, the main focus here is not flow, visual harmony, and all that stuff. It's going to be emphasis. It's going to be creating hierarchy in your design. So hopefully that helps out. Remember, when you set this up in Illustrator, that in order to get the same sort of a layout, you're going to want to start a new document in Illustrator. PowerPoint automatically sets up its slide size to be exactly the same, which happens to be about 13 inches wide by 7.5 inches tall. So I went ahead in my Illustrator document, set up a new file at 13 inches wide by 7.5 inches tall. So make sure you double check that, make sure it's that size. From there, you can hit Control-R and turn on your rulers and drag out guides. That's something we covered earlier in the year. And set this up so that you have 2/3 of an area here for the larger truck, and only 1/3 on the right, and the same top and bottom to start laying out your stuff, and use those guides to your advantage to make sense of that. So have fun with it. If you have questions, email me, and I will talk to you guys next week.